Hi there and welcome to the Die House Drumworks. Just moving on a little bit with some sight reading here. So this is kind of the approximate equivalent to the Rockschool Grade 1 sort of sight reading level. So what we're going to look at today, we'll have a quick recap on time signatures and tempo, that sort of thing. So the time signature we'd normally have at the beginning of the piece. 4/4 is a very common time. I've actually used the other piece of notation here, the big letter C at the beginning for common time, meaning that we've got a pulse of 4 within the bar, and that pulse is our quarter note or crotchet, which we dealt with in the first sight reading tutorial. So 4 main counts in the bar, here they are, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's our pulse of 4 quarter notes in the bar. What we're going to look at here a little bit more today are different variations of note values, so the next more common note values that we're likely to come across. We touched on the idea of eighth notes or quavers in the previous video, which we're going to look at a little bit more here. So there's our 4 quarter notes. So we know that each one lasts for a whole count. So 1 lasts up until 2, 2 lasts till 3, 3 lasts till 4, and 4 lasts till 1 in the next bar. To get eighth notes, we'll put a beat in between each of those. So let's do that in the second bar. Here's our 4 quarter notes. And here are our eighth notes or quaver counts in between. Okay, so there's the dots. So we still have 1, 2, 3, 4. But now we use the count of and in between each of those. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, which takes us to the end of the bar. So it's a very common hi-hat count, and 2 and 3 and 4 and for our rock pop sort of patterns. So there's the note heads, they're coloured in, 8 of them in the bar. There's the stems, so remember the anatomy of the note head here, and the stems going either up or downwards from the note head as well. You can have a beat which has a note head and has a stem coming down. Doesn't change anything really in terms of the value of the note at all. We'll come back to the specifics of that a little bit later. We can't leave these notes like this just with stems though, because they look like quarter notes, and the whole point of using notation is that we can make notes look different to explain exactly what the note is, so the note does actually look different. And the way that we can join them, we can either join them with a beam, like this, so we have a pair of quavers joined with a beam like that. We can have them with tails, which again we touched on before. We can have tails as well, so 1 tail or 1 beam, or we can join a whole bunch of them together with a beam as well. All different ways of writing exactly the same note value. You'll see them notated in different ways depending on the environment that they're in and depending on the arranger as well. It's kind of a stylistic thing as much as anything. But the important thing to remember at this stage, which will get you through, is that if it's got 1 beam or 1 tail on the note, it's a quaver or an eighth note. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So this exercise, if we set up our metronome again, I'm going to go for 80 crotchets a minute. Again, the only reason for that I'm going to go with that same tempo, is that is the pace actually of the grade 1 exercises. So it's a nice gentle speed and it keeps it relevant to the Rockschool syllabus as well. So there's our tempo. So the first bar, if we repeat that round, will be crotchets. 1, 2, 1, 2. Nice and steady, so 1 per click. When we're playing the eighth notes or the quavers in the second bar, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so a good way of getting used to that count is counting in crotchets first, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then add the eighth note afterwards. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. There's eighth notes. Another thing worth considering at this point is that when you're playing a sight reading piece or any sort of fills or patterns at this sort of tempo, you may want to consider altering the sticking pattern a little bit. What I mean by that is that when we're playing nice slow beats, quarter notes will be a good example. If we're right-handed, it will make sense to play those with the right hand. Once we start getting to eighth notes, you're just getting to the point where maybe, especially when you're starting out, that it maybe feels a little bit awkward to do those with one hand. And we don't want to become too right hand dependent. We want to open up the possibility of using single stroke sticking. Right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. And now's a good time to get used to that. So if we were playing a bar of quavers, we might play right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. Now, in an exam situation, you're generally not going to get marked on sticking patterns. It's not important what sticking pattern you use in terms of it. As long as it sounds okay, the marks are going to be there for you. Having said that, I think one of the clever things that they've done with the tempo here, at sort of 80 crotchets a minute, you start getting into eighth notes, it just can make things feel a little bit more comfortable to use two hands. So I would certainly encourage you to start using two hands. Having said that, if you're finding that very difficult, but you're happy just doing that with one hand and you're getting the correct rhythm, don't worry about doing that in the exam, that's fine. Keep working on your single stroke sticking, so adding the left hand in more, and work on getting that together over time. So we talked again about time signatures, we talked a little bit about tempo, note values, we've introduced the eighth note. I want to also talk a little bit about the rest value within eighth notes as well. If you remember back, for instance, if we're in quarter notes and we wanted to leave a space at any point in the bar, let's say on the count of two, we want to create a gap on the count of two. We can't just take that beat away. It's okay if we've got our counting up here, that's kind of useful for us to know where we are within the bar, but in terms of the music and having complete bars of four, which is what we need when we're in common time, we've only got 3 events happening, so we need to put something in here to say that there isn't anything happening. And that's where your crotchet rest would come in. Could have drawn that a little bit better. There we go. So, looks a little bit different printed. Again, you'll see these in the books, but the crotchet rest is the one that looks like a little bolt of lightning there. So 1, rest, 3, 4. We can introduce these within the quavers as well. So if we took out maybe the count of 1 here, let's say, again, we can't just leave a gap there. We've got the whole of the count of 1 up to the count of 2. We've now got no notes, so we need to put in a rest to say that's the case. And a crotchet rest would do that. So rest and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Rather like note values, we can have rests that last a different length of time as well. This is all about creating very specific rhythm in the bar. So let's say, for instance, we'll take this second bar, and if we just want to maybe create a rest on the count of 3, but not the count of and. Notice on 1 here, 1 and, that's the whole count of 1 would be taken up by the crotchet rest. So let's take out the count of 3. There it is. So we can't leave, same thing again, we can't just leave a gap there, we need to put something in there that tells us that there's a space. And that's where we would use a quaver rest, because if we want this rest on 3, but to only last till and, so it's only half a count of space, we would use a quaver rest. So the rhythm of this bar, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Get the idea? So we get a little bit of almost like a bit of syncopation at the end of the bar there. 3 and 4 and. Now for grade 1, it's unlikely that you're going to come across quaver rests, so we don't really need to worry about those too much. Just wanted to introduce that idea that in the same way as we can have note values that last different lengths, we can have rest values that last equivalent lengths as well. Another thing I wanted to maybe throw in at this point, I'm going to take that second bar out because that's getting a little bit complicated there for now. We'll come back to that later. The crotchet and the crotchet rest here on the count of 1. If we play 1, rest, so 1, 2, we can think, well, hang on a minute, do we really need to have 2 things to tell us that we're playing 1 beat? Well, there is another way, and this is something that is worth introducing, certainly at grade 1, because it's an easy sort of note value concept to deal with. But it's one that we don't see in the sight reading quite so much, and actually we don't see in drum notation quite so much, but it's worth us understanding to help us fully understand this idea of notes lasting different lengths of time. What we can do is we can get rid of this rest if we make this note last longer. So if we can turn this into a note value that lasts for 2 whole counts, so until the count of 3, we don't need to use the rest. And the way that we would do that is we would turn this beat into, rather than being a quarter note, we'd turn it into a half note or a minim, okay, a half note. The way that we would do that is we keep the stem, it still has just a stem, there's no beams or tails attaching it to the next note, but it is what we call a hollow note head. It's not coloured in, okay, it's a hollow note head, so it's a longer lasting note. So that note on 1 now lasts all the way until 3. So we get 1, 2, 3. Now again, it's a difficult concept for us as drummers to imagine this note lasting that length of time because the note sounds so short on the snare drum. But again, if you were playing the trumpet, ba, 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 so it would last ba, ba, ba. It would last that whole length of time. The way that we could do it on the snare drum is to play a roll. And that's often where we'll see the minim used in roll notation. So it's not that often in rock and pop stuff that we're going to be using rolls, but it's worth understanding that because some arrangers will use the minim note value a little bit more extensively. So time signatures, 4/4 time or common time, tempo we've talked about a little, we'll come on to tempo a little bit more later on. Note values, crotchets and quavers, and minims now, so that's the longer note value, a half note, quarter notes are your crotchets, quavers, eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So just think about the length of those notes each time. The sight reading example that we've got actually in the new grade 1 books, that's the 2012 syllabus, the new one is just out. 80 crotchets a minute, I'm going to tap through that for you as well. Here we go. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So notice that I was using single strokes. Wherever we get the quavers, right, left, it just helps to get the pace out a little bit more. But you could do it all with one hand as well, but I would encourage you to start using the single stroke movement if you can. So good luck with your sight reading.